Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a great day. As I told you guys in class, this would have been a class presentation at some point during our discussion of the cold dish. And all of the writings that are in this video were writings that you were going to do during the discussion of the cold dish. This title, I think, gives away the two things that I think are extremely important. First of all, we're going to talk about trying to make connections. In the book, I've said several times already that we're talking about character. Who are Walt? Who's Henry? The idea of conflict. What are all of the conflicts involved here? We're going to talk about connections. I also wanted to add the idea of voice. Henry has his own specific voice. Walt has his own voice. Vic has her own voice. And each of you as writers, even though this is a class on research, should be working to establish your own voice. And one of the ways I think people establish their voice is by being a tad bit on the geeky side. And so today we're going to dive into a bit of geekiness, and we're going to talk about a character I haven't mentioned, Ferg, and then we're just going to move on and talk about ourselves a little bit. You're basically going to be writing a couple of paragraphs that amount to a narrative, letting me know what things you're into that might be considered geeky and how and why you're into those things. As always, all images and quoted text are used for educational purposes. I'm not trying to rip anybody off. I'm not making money off of this. It's not a monetized video. It's for my students who miss class, or in this case, it's for me because I have to miss class. Let's look at the geeking out. Walt walks over to the back of the DCI Suburbans where Ferg and El Monroe were having an animated conversation concerning the relative advantages of the Bitch Creek nymph over the number 16 elk hair caddis. I have no idea what those things are. I absolutely positively have no idea what those things are. I have no idea what goes into the pockets of all of the fishermen's vests. I have no idea about any of this sort of stuff. And I probably don't want to know. At the same time, however, stuff that Al and Ferg find normal seem to, have lots of names and lots of terminology. So we have the beadhead nymph light green, and we have a humpy fly green, and we have something called a parachute Adams down at the bottom, and a woolly worm blackish green. And apparently, those are all types of lures that one would use if one was fly fishing. I've got no idea. I've also got no idea why one would want to stand out in the middle of the water, throwing the line like that, time after time after time, having to be almost perfect to get the fish to come up, and why you would want to have a basket full of fish hung around your shoulders. It's just not my thing. I hope everybody who does that enjoys it. It's just not my thing. And I'm amazed at all the accoutrement one needs to go out and go fishing. I had no idea, literally had no idea. I still have no idea. But this passage got me thinking about how many geek elements do I have? How many things do I have going that people would consider geeky? Well, certainly, there's the comics. You've had them foisted upon you. Those of you who chatted with me and said you really enjoyed the mini deaths of Layla Starr, I appreciate that. I'm a baseball fan. I like talking about baseball. I like watching baseball. And for a lot of people, baseball is a boring game. And when you talk about fastballs and knuckleballs and curves and batting average, people's eyes roll back in their head. My wife tells me I have too many pocket knives. There's a couple drawers in our house that are kind of full of pocket knives. Some are, manual flippers and thumb stud openings. Some are the traditional kind of pocket joints, the slip joints. I got a lot of them. In fact, I got way too many of them, probably. Don't tell my wife I said that. I also like writing with a fountain pen. A lot of you have never seen one, probably. A lot of you don't understand the nib. A lot of you thought fountain pens went extinct right about the time the ballpoint came in, and that the ballpoint has gone extinct as soon as the laptops came around. So I got a lot of geek elements. And when I talk about them, I'm probably as bad as Ferg. When I talk about WRC plus or on base percentage or OPS or FIP, fielding independent pitching, and I talk about phrases like slash line for baseball. When I talk about comics, I talk about slabs and variants, splash pages and reboots. When I talk about my fountain pens, I talk about whether it's a cartridge converter or whether it's an eyedropper pen or whether it's a demonstrator or whether it's made with some sort of acrylic and what kind of nib does it have? Is it a stub? Is it a flex? Or pocket knives. I talk about the types of blade. Is it a sheepfoot? Is it a Warncliffe? I talk about whether they should be called scales or covers, depending whether I'm talking about the traditional slip joint knives or whether I'm talking about a modern folder. I talk about old fashioned patterns like the Congress. And I talk about blade steels like S35VN or the newest, most recent hot thing, MagnaCut. I spent a lot of time with a lot of specialized vocabulary talking a lot about geeky stuff. And I am of the firm opinion that almost everybody has a hobby, an interest, a passion that outsiders will find geeky. You might believe it's in the mainstream. You might believe that everybody does this or everybody should do this, but there are people outside of your little group or even your very, very huge group that will find this thing geeky. So, daily writing part one: what is a hobby, an interest, a passion? And you can pick any of those words that you have that others will find geeky. What are some special tools, pieces of gear, clothing? For example, as a baseball fan, I have a couple of baseball jerseys that I, just think it's important that I, as a fan, have. With fountain pens, I have all sorts of little tools to take a couple of them apart, to fill certain pens, to do all sorts of stuff like that. I have more sharpeners than I should know what to do with to take care of my pocket knives. You saw a list of a partial list, a small list of the technical vocabulary. All right. But even if you're a Taylor Swift fan and you think that everybody's a Taylor Swift fan, there's those friendship bracelet things and there's all sorts of stuff involved with being a Swiftie. What is that all about? Next, Walt gives us an outsider's point of view. At the very beginning, he waxes philosophic. I've wondered about men who spend their time trying to anticipate and know a fish in a world where man's knowledge of each other could only be called scarce. The fact that humans don't understand each other, and yet we're going to try to understand another species, that's a profound bit of insight. Then he gets a little bit more judgmental. It just seems gratuitously ignorant to try to think like a fish. And then he calls into question their character a little bit. Okay, there's deceit. And then he just goes overboard. A lot of hyperbole. They're as bad as drug fiends living in their shadowy world of aquatic intrigue. As a baseball fan, I'm called old fashioned. I'm called behind the times. I'm called a lot of things. As a comic book fan, people, I think, um, assume that I still live in my mother's basement. The person who, collects fountain pens, some people might view that as snobbish and gratuitously old fashioned for an age when computers and phones do everything you used to write down. And I think the pocket knives things, people wonder if I have, 5,000 cases of MREs in my basement because I'm preparing for the apocalypse. Outsiders have a lot of questions. Outsiders make a lot of judgments. My own view is that whenever I tell people I'm into fountain pens, or I'm into pocket knives, or I'm into comics, and they look at my gray hair, the first words out of their mouth are, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So the second thing I want you to do in the daily writing is, how do you believe outsiders see that hobby and that interest? And write your response like Walt, not me. In other words, you can be hyperbolic. You can say you think that these people are judging you in this way, and you believe that this is what they think about you. But, avoid the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday element. Try to avoid the stereotypes. Walt was hyperbolic, Walt went over the top, but I didn't see any stereotyping. Finally, I think the question is always why. Lately, it seems to me that I've seen a lot about the 5 whys. That every time somebody has a problem, they should just ask the question why 5 times. Why did the problem occur? Why did the instigating incident occur? And just keep running through the questions why. And if you ask the question why 5 times, you get to a solution. Tradition. I think there's something traditional about having a pocket knife in one's pocket. There's something traditional about writing in cursive. There's something traditional about the fountain pen that I kind of like. Comic books have been part of my life for a long time, so even if there's not a large literary tradition going back centuries, I think that it's part of my personal tradition. Nostalgia? Might be. Uh, I certainly had, saw fountain pens when I was a very, very young kid. When I was in the third grade, they still made us buy a fountain pen to learn how to write cursive. Comic books take me back to a simpler time a lot. All right, depending on the book, depending on the writer. Pocket knives, uh, they're human's oldest tool, but there's a sense of nostalgia with that old slip joint. My father had one, my grandfather had one. So I think all of that's kind of important. Habit might be. I've carried a pocket knife since I was a kid. I've written things longhand since I was a kid. I've read comic books since I was a kid. I've watched baseball since I was a kid. I listened to it on the radio since I was a kid. Maybe it is just a sense of habit. It's something I've been doing for over 60 years. There's a certain amount of connection and belonging anytime you're part of a group that has a special hobby. Whether it's a bunch of knife nerds, whether it's a bunch of comic book geeks, whether it's a bunch of fountain pen aficionados, whether it's a bunch of baseball fans, there's a sense of connection and belonging. Maybe that's part of it. Escape, that might be part of it. The world's kind of a crazy place. You escape into your rabbit hole. I write some words down. I watch some videos about pens. People in the pen community seem to like other people who like pens. Maybe it's just a sense of escape from the strange, wild bizarreness. Writing certainly helps me think. Baseball certainly helps me think. I hope the many deaths of Layla Starr, the comic, helped you think. So a sense of contemplation. And maybe, just maybe, the mix of form and function is pleasing. Pens have a nice form and they still let me write. Comic books, have a great art form and it's a pleasing way to tell a story. The pocket knife is a tool, but there's something nice, at least in my head, about being able to open one slowly and peel an apple or do whatever. Maybe it's all of these things. So, your third little bit of daily writing. Oh, wish fulfillment. Maybe I just like it because I like it. Maybe it fulfilled some secret wishes I had when I was a little kid and I never got to have everything. And now I just want to pick them up. My wife tells me I'm 12. Might be it. So, why do you like this thing? Why does it matter to you? And go beyond the simple. Go beyond I like it. Go beyond it's fun. Go beyond it's pretty. Give some concrete examples about why it matters to you. I hope to be in class next Monday. Hope all of you have a great weekend. And we'll kind of kick it into gear talking about the book proper next class period.